Several American cities where an alarming number of people were shot up in the streets over the weekend. Authorities are pointing out that many of these communities that are struggling with the stresses of COVID-19 are also struggling with an alarming increase in homicides.
Enough is enough.
Atlanta's mayor says she is fed up with the violence on her city streets in the wake of the protests over the policing of black Americans, and says her heart is broken over the shooting death of an 8-year-old girl Saturday night.
We're fighting the enemy within when we are shooting each other up on our streets in this city, and you shot and killed a baby.
Sequoia Turner was shot near here, outside the Wendy's parking lot, where 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks was killed at the hands of a white police officer last month. People with long guns have taken over the restaurant and the street in front of it, and police let it happen. The girl was shot by someone there while riding in a car with her mother and another adult.
This random wild, wild west shoot 'em up because you can? It's gotta stop. It has to stop.
The people in charge of the area are blocking roads with barricades and their guns. The restaurant has become a memorial to Rayshard Brooks, and people trying to peacefully demonstrate still visit it.
If you want people to take us seriously, and you don't want us to lose this movement, then we can't lose each other.
It is not enough for us to get together and share our stories of pain. It is a good thing to do, but it is not enough. Because if we see that it has become a tradition for our children to be victims of violence, then we must then understand that something incredibly strong has to be done to change the momentum of the way that our country and the way that our world is moving. People are afraid of the criticism, because when criticism is raised, it means that there's a finger pointing at you, and nobody wants the finger pointing at them, because everybody wants to feel that everything they have done has been to the best of their ability. But too many of us are lazy, and too many of us are comfortable, and too many of us have accepted pain as the predominant feature in our lives. And what that means is that we have become comfortable with the ills that are happening to our children. We expect them to die young. We expect their friends to die young. We expect their cousins to die young. And we're upset about it, but not upset enough to bring about a radical change. What happened to our energy? The energy that we used in 1999 to argue over small things is not even the same energy that we use to confront people who are killing us and our children. There are people probably in this room who get more excited if somebody drank the last bit of Coca-Cola out of your refrigerator. Who took the Coca-Cola? Who moved my cigarette? Who told you you could have that? People who get more excited about little things like that and become silent and immobilized when a big grievance occurs, like the loss of your children and the loss of your relatives and the loss of your freedom and the loss of your justice. Could it be that we are all afraid that we can jump big and bad with one another? We can get real angry and hateful towards one another, but we can't muster up enough energy to change the conditions that creates a tradition of death in our communities.
Peace, family. This is African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. A lot of tragic news going on in our community, and I wanted to talk about this story because it's kind of concerning that I'm noticing certain patterns, particularly coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement. And you guys know I'm pretty critical of a lot of aspects of that movement. But one of the patterns that has always persisted is, I guess, a lot of empathy being put forth towards our people whenever they are killed by white people who we feel like are wrongfully killed by those people. But we don't have that same empathy, or we don't show that same empathy or regard for life whenever we're killed by ourselves. Now, I'm talking particularly about what happened in Atlanta this past weekend. A number of children were murdered in black on black interracial violence, whatever you want to call it. That we were killed by, more than likely, by people who look like us, right? And we won't see, I predict, the same outrage. We won't see the same, forget outrage, just empathy. You know, as a mother, you know, I have a certain empathy whenever I see any child killed, and particularly when I see a child from my community, it hits me a certain way when I see a child that just looks just like my child just killed mercilessly. As a sister, I feel the same way. As a daughter, I feel the same way, because I recognize that any of those people could have been my sibling, could have been my child, could have been my parent, could have been my aunt or uncle. So because I am allowing myself to empathize, I feel really concerned that we have allowed people who pose as being leaders of our community, they pose as being Black leaders, tell us that it is okay to not show the same regard for us whenever we're killed by ourselves. Now, you may say that they don't say that. They don't say that it's okay, but their actions say that, because whenever we're allowed to have mass discussions, mass demonstrations, make George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, just so many people have been killed, Breonna Taylor, make them symbols of resistance, but we don't take the same time to look at the people who were killed by our own people as forms of resistance also. They too are martyrs, whether or not you recognize it. They too are people whose blood was shed as a result of white supremacy. Now, was it an actual white person who took that person's life? Was it an actual police officer that took that person's life? No. But they were killed as a result of structural racism, the same way that Ahmaud Arbery was killed from structural racism, the same way that George Floyd was killed by structural racism, the same way that Breonna Taylor was killed by structural racism. Whenever there is black on black violence, that is the same thing. So we'll hear stories about how good of a father George Floyd was. We'll hear stories about how Ahmaud Arbery was this model citizen, or how about Breonna Taylor was going to make so much out of her future. We'll hear those stories. But we won't hear the stories from people who were killed by us, and it just doesn't make sense. Now, I have theories as to why that is the case, but before I even get to there, let's go to this story. Sad story, horrible story, out of Atlanta. So, children ages 7, 8, and 14 years old were killed as gun violence mars holiday weekend in Chicago and Atlanta. Sorry, it wasn't just Atlanta, but we know Chicago. We always hear stories about Chicago. We always hear stories about Baltimore. We always hear stories about Atlanta. So this is something that happened over the past weekend. A rash of shootings in Chicago and Atlanta marred the 4th of July weekend and left families of 3 children grieving over their deaths. At least 72 people were shot in Chicago. 72 people shot in Chicago. Early Friday morning, 15 fatally shot, including a 7-year-old girl who was visiting her grandmother on the holiday weekend, according to police. When families should be celebrating, having a good time, spending time together, a 7-year-old girl was taken from us, a chief of detective said. He said the 7-year-old girl was here visiting her grandmother, visiting family, and now she's gone. The shooting unfolded around 7 p.m. on Saturday, as the girl, identified by authorities as Natalie Wallace, was walking with other children and family in front of her grandmother's house in the Austin neighborhood on the west side of Chicago. Several men arrived in a light-colored car, got out, and began firing in the direction of Natalie and her relatives. The little girl was hit in her forehead. She was taken to a hospital where she died. Scrolling down, 14 hours later, a 14-year-old boy was among 4 people shot and killed at a large holiday gathering in Inglewood still in Chicago, neighborhood on the south side of the city. The child, whose name has not been released, was shot in the back and then taken to the coroner's office where he was pronounced dead. And then a 10-year-old girl was wounded in Rogers Park in Chicago. I'm scrolling down to Atlanta. So meanwhile, an 8-year-old girl was killed in Atlanta on Saturday night when someone opened fire on a car where she was riding with her mother and another adult, police said. So the interesting thing about the girl in Atlanta was that she was actually killed very close to a demonstration for Ahmaud Arbery. So here we are, people are trying to gather to mourn the death of Ahmaud Arbery, someone who, again, is a martyr of white supremacy, a martyr of police violence. And we have another girl who's made a martyr of the same white supremacy, but this time it was at the hands of ourselves. Now, when you hear about people bring this point up, and I think a lot of the way that we carry ourselves, we carry ourselves in how we don't want to deal with certain responses from the right wing, for example. So whenever we want to talk about police brutality, what do they say? Well, how are you going to talk about police brutality when you have murder in your neighborhoods? Murder. Here are a lot of activists. Their response is, well, those people actually go to jail, whereas when our people are killed by white people or killed by police, they don't necessarily go to jail. Which is true, but my question is that should affect our response to how we deal with the situation. But does that mean we don't deal with the situation? Does that mean we ignore the situation? Does that mean we don't find some way to organize to address the situation? I understand organizing to address police brutality. Why not organize to address the violence that happens in our communities? So just saying, well, those people go to jail, that's okay. I understand that can be your response to these right-wing conservatives who don't care about your community. That should completely be your response. And frankly, you don't owe anyone an explanation for why you're going to fight an unjust killing. The fact that it is an unjust killing, that should be where it ends. Now, when you go back to your community, what are you going to do about the situation that's happening there? Because just saying, well, hey, these people go to jail, so it's fine. We're going to focus on one issue and not the other. That shouldn't be enough. So I think the reason why we'll hear people want to talk about violence that happens from white people or from the police and not talk about intraracial violence in our communities is because, number one, a lot of these people who pose themselves as being activists in our community are really not activists in our community. And I'm not going to name people. You guys, I'm sure by now know of all the Black Lives Matter people who are often put on news. You'll see them on the news. You'll see them on popular blog sites. You'll see them on popular podcasts or radio stations. And they say these people are the activists. These are the people who are the activists in our community. Now, these people a lot of times aren't really connected to the community. Yeah, they might be Black, but they don't actually engage with the Black communities around them. They'll more so stay in the white community, but whenever there's a speaking engagement, they'll want to go to the Black community, collect their check, and then they go back to living their life in their middle-class suburban life. These type of people are not positioned to deal with issues of intraracial violence. They're not qualified, frankly. If you don't make an effort to engage with your people, not forget MSNBC, forget CNN, forget the mayor's office, forget all that stuff. Yeah, we get that that's where your connections are. But if you're not poised to actually organize in your community, then you're not going to be able to address something like Black on Black violence. Now, the other thing you'll hear them say is, well, Black on Black violence, that is a result of poverty, and so we're going to try to do things to push for reforms as far as poverty. We're going to try to force a capitalist system to not impoverish Black people. Which, if any of you know my position is that this system will never willingly stop oppressing Black people, willingly. So, but that's their answer. We're going to try to undo the conditions of poverty, right? the answer to that is, well, number one, poverty does not explain everything that happens as far as black on black violence. When you actually look at the rate of it, when you look at the phenomena of it, it doesn't explain the full picture. There's another element, and there's a psychological element that's not accounted for. You can say that because when you look at poverty in other communities, they'll have violence, certainly, but the rate of violence in the black community is just exacerbated past anything that you really see in other communities. Something you can compare the rate of violence in the black community to is the rate of violence in the black community in South Africa. So look at South Africa. South Africa is very much our cousins in the struggle. When you look at what happened to them in their past, when you look at what happened as far as apartheid, you had a government of white supremacy that was oppressing black people. The difference between South Africa and the U.S. is that in the U.S. we're a minority, in South Africa they're a majority. But a lot of the same effects of racism happened not just there, but happened here. So when you look at South Africa, more than any other country in Africa, South Africa has the highest rate of intraracial violence that's not related to any war or conflict. Meaning, when you go to the areas of South Africa that are poor dumps or whatever, your likelihood of getting killed there it could be someone who's just engaged in crime. It could be someone who's engaged in violence against women. It could be any of those things. Your likelihood of being killed there versus being killed, say, in Tanzania, inside of that same slum, is a lot higher. Now, why is that, we should ask? Why South Africa out of all the countries in Africa, especially given the fact that we know that South Africa is more economically fluid? The answer is that white supremacy has caused psychological effects in South Africa, being under a white supremacist regime where the people are not able to actualize their own destinies in the same way that it has in Black America. Now, when you talk like this, again, is the way that Black Lives Matter runs, which is you wait for someone to get killed. After that person gets killed, you protest. After the protest, you wait, and then you protest some more. Is that the way that you're going to undo the psychological manipulation as far as interracial violence in the Black community? It's not. They're not positioned to, they're not, frankly, in my position, they're not positioned, in my opinion, they're not positioned to even deal with with police violence of Black people, even the way that they engage, even the way that they react, because they're a reactionary movement. They're certainly, however, as a reactionary movement, not positioned to deal with the conditions in our communities. So that's another thing. And another thing that you'll hear is you'll hear that, well, Black people, we don't have an issue of Black on Black violence. We kill people who are in proximity to us. Again, that is true. You kill people who are in proximity to you. But the rate that we kill people in proximity to us, again, is higher than other communities. So again, this goes back to the psychological aspect. Why are we killing ourselves so easily and so quickly? I've talked about this so many times, and there's a great book by Dr. Amos Wilson, Black on Black Violence, that just breaks it completely down. The fact that we are faced with feeling powerless because of our existence in a white supremacist regime. And because of that powerlessness, we try to exercise power over those who are in proximity to us, and that is where you have violence against people who look like us, because it's a play to try to enforce power on people close to us. You know, the book breaks it down beautifully. I'm not going to go into the whole dynamics that Dr. Wilson explains, but so I'm saying this to say that the way that Black Lives Matter operates, they're not positioned to actually deal with these issues. And the way that we deal with these issues is by organizing in our community. But the way that we don't deal with it is by ignoring it because we're afraid of what some conservative person on Fox NBC, MSNBC is going to say whenever they say, hey, what about Black on Black violence? My thing is, who cares what they think? We have to think for ourselves. We're not in this Democrat versus Republican fight. You know, if you don't know, that's not your fight. Your fight is for Black people against white supremacy in every manifestation of it, being intraracial violence, being violence from outside, whatever the manifestation is. That is what your fight is. So I'm just saying this to say, you know, there's Black children who were killed. I'm hoping our people take this as a sign. It's time for us to start organizing. This is not the first time this has happened. This is, I don't know how many times, you know, since I've been doing this channel, I've covered stories like this. I mean, probably the most tragic one not because the child's life was, you know, any more valuable than any other child killed, but just because of the way it was done. Was Tyshawn Lee in Chicago, where you had this, I think, 2 or 3 gang members take this child, lead him away from wherever he was playing, and shoot him in the head because they're trying to get revenge on his father. This is a serious problem, and what have we done? What have we done to bring Tyshawn Lee justice since he died? What have we done to address what he died for since he died? What have we done as a collective? Because this is not a Chicago problem. You know, just in Baltimore, I posted this story on Twitter. Just in Baltimore, a pregnant woman, she was 8 months pregnant. This girl was young. I think she was like 19, maybe 20. Pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and her 3-year-old daughter shot and killed. They found the bodies in her car. A pregnant woman. Like, these are the types of things that we should not be ignoring. And again, I get it. Police brutality does not negate or fight against police brutality. Police brutality should not be negated by what happens in our communities as far as interracial violence, but certainly it should not be ignored what happens in our community as a way to try to validate a fight against police brutality. You know, you have to, again, empathize. These are people who look like us. These are our people. And the saddest thing is we don't need the KKK anymore to kill our people. We don't need the lynch mobs anymore. We are doing the job for them, and yet we're not ready to respond to the issue. And then all it is a matter of loving yourself and loving those children, loving those parents, those grandparents, everyone who become victims of these types of things, loving them the same way that you love yourself, the same way that you love your child. If you love them, you'll be willing to do something to change those conditions. So in conclusion, the answer is we have to organize and we have to come together. We have to come together among ourselves. This is not something that the outside dominant society is poised to deal with. This is something that only we are poised to deal with. We have to deal with the centuries of psychological damage that has been done to our people, centuries of psychological damage that would make us think, number one, that it's okay to take the lives of our brothers and sisters so easily, but number two, that would have us think it's okay to ignore these things and think that it's just another day, you know, as far as Black people being killed, and not feel like we have a way and a means to actually address those issues. So I say all this to say, understand that you are empowered. We are empowered to make a difference. We are empowered to address this issue. We are empowered to address this issue more than we're empowered to address police brutality, if you think about it. Because when you're talking about police brutality, you're talking about a whole white supremacist system that has been built on this idea that Black people be subjugated into a certain position. This is what police brutality is a manifestation of. Police brutality is not the cause, it's the effect of a white supremacist system. So when you think about how difficult it would be to actually stop police killings versus how difficult it would be for us to come together and deal with the psychological conditioning of slavery in our community. Frankly, I'd much rather spend my time coming together among ourselves the same way that we have to build a means of self-defense among ourselves. We have to build a means of self-love among ourselves, love among ourselves, in order to get rid of these conditions in our mind and the ones that we live in that cause these atmospheres of violence to be prevalent. So I just say this to say, you know, our people, please organize. If you're in a Black organization, stay in that organization and be active. If you're not, please find one to be engaged in, because this is literally life or death. Don't take these deaths to be something casual or business as usual. These are our children. Those are your children. You might not know them, but those are your children. Don't be fooled. Those are your children who were killed, you know, so don't have a different response because the news encourages you to have one response versus the other response. So that's all I have on this, you all. I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Again, this is not a condemnation of us. This is just a challenge for us to do better and to recognize the lives of our people the same way universally, regardless of the means or the weapon used to bring about the death. The fact is they were all brought about by a white supremacist system. So this is our opportunity to recognize that every single form or manifestation of white supremacy that takes a Black life, that has killed one of our people, and that system has to be dealt with appropriately. So that is all I have for this video. I will see you guys in the next video. the Justice Bank. So what is the Justice Bank? I've talked before about the fact that we were trying to do a bail project, but we ended up deciding to do a mutual aid fund. The Justice Bank initiative will essentially take members, and if you would pay a very low monthly membership fee. We're going to keep it low on purpose because we are servicing a people who are the most disenfranchised in this country, the most under attack, and it's not reasonable to expect that there's that someone could pay $30 a month, $50 a month, whenever you are of that group. Now, when you become a member, we're going to have a trial period, maybe say after 3 or 6 months, whatever, you are eligible to petition us for help with your expenses. Now, what type of people who are targeted from the prison industrial complex, what type of people would be eligible? Well, because we're doing a mutual aid society, that would be democratic. What we mean is that if you are a member of the Justice Bank, you would have a say in what types of, let's say, charges or offenses that you want to be covered under the Justice Bank. The idea is that all of us are putting our money in collectively because we are a target of the prison industrial complex. Every single day that we walk out, you as a Black person, you are seen as a criminal in this country, and that is a fact. And we want to offer a type of protection for our people. And almost like an insurance policy, honestly, that if you do have some type of run-in with the law, if you do have a charge, a criminal charge, that you can count on a mutual aid society to help you and assist you with those types of charges.
Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about Black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of Black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9.